after a civil war where the king is waging war against other factions in his own country. He is arrested by Parliament, his own people, tried and executed. That has never happened before to any king anywhere. Now, there's always plots and conspiracies and backroom dealings, and we have had civil war before, back under Henry VII. But to actually try and execute the king, I'm still trying to understand whether I think that is a good thing or not. Because he was not a good person. He was a blasphemer and a great swearer, as his father was as well. But I'm not much in favor of killing people. It has consequences that are not always known when the action is taken. Now, I know you have questions.
I would like a photo with you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Nancy.
Carolyn can look at it and see what she thinks.
What's the most important thing for teachers to be able to teach about Roger Williams? If they can't fit everything in, because there's so much,
Yeah. There's two basic things that Roger does. This separation of church and state. Okay. But when that happens, it does something else. When you separate church and state, the government can no longer claim that God gave it the authority to work. So, as Roger wrote in 1644, the foundation of civil power lies in the people. To create a government that meets their needs, give it as much power as they choose, and only lasts so long as it continues to serve their needs. Those two things, one is a consequence of the other, but those are the two things that make Rhode Island different than just about any of the other colonies. Because that kind of idea is in our charter, the charter we got, where we can elect our own governor. We don't have to have a royal governor appointed, a friend of the king, to come over here and stuff his pockets with our money and then go back and live like royalty. We, Rhode Islanders, get to select one of our own to be in charge of our government. We elect representatives to go and create the laws for our place. We don't just go by English law. We can make our own laws. The level of freedom expressed in that charter was greater than anything in the old world or the new. And that started right here. And those ideals are handed down, hopefully, through history.
Great answer. I do have another question now.
Right there.
So what's the most common misperception you hear about Roger from, I don't want to say teachers, but from people teaching about Roger or talking about Roger?
I will keep it current. There's much talk of slavery during the time that I am here. There is no talk of servitude. Okay? There was a law that was passed in 1652 that prevented perpetual slavery in Rhode Island, okay, for blacks and for whites. Think about the implication of the wording of the law. The whites were being enslaved as well. That was this is what would be called now chattel slavery. Okay. We do have, and have from ages going on, servitude, where someone that falls into debt becomes a servant. Someone that commits a minor crime becomes a servant to pay back for the crime. Someone that is captured in war may be sold into that kind of servitude, but it's for a period of time. It's not for the rest of their lives. And that's what happened when Cromwell goes to Ireland. They took many of the Irish, thousands of them, and sent them to the Caribbean. The best way to describe it would be involuntary indenture. For a period of time now, they're in the Caribbean, and they have to work on the sugar fields. Did not go over well for a lot of the Irish down there, I can tell you that. But this idea of sending ships to Africa to take people and bring them back to the New World and sell them as chattel property That's stealing. Always has been stealing. And a person is not property. That's the difference. That's one major factor. This idea that they don't make the difference in between slavery, perpetual slavery, and servitude. And we don't even in our language. And that's the problem with when people read, and do a cursory read of things, they don't look into what the meanings of the words are when we say them. Another is that I bought the land of Providence from the Narragansett. There was no money. That initial, as everyone calls the deed to Providence, is not a deed, it's a land evidence. During my lifetime, there's a great change in the British concept of property ownership, due mostly to the Civil War, where a lot of the landed gentry were unlanded, if you would, because Parliament and the people were taking more control over the country. And the idea of an individual owning his own land was something new. When I left England, it was very much still in a feudal property state, where you don't get to own land, you get to live on someone else's land. And a feudal lord in an area can demand services from you or demand product from you. And overall in England, the king owns all of it. You don't really own it, the king owns it. And they can appoint or take away property and titles from any of the lords in the land. And many say that we did not understand the way the native peoples thought about land, where the tribe owns the land. And individual leaders may have sections of that land. And that this land evidence that was created in between myself, Canonicus, and the Antinomy was not a deed, because a deed implies sale. There was no money giving back on one side or the other. It was an agreement that we could live on this portion of land that was outlined, okay? And in return, I would do services for Canonicus and the Antinomy. It was very much in line with the way the English understand land. So it's not that I bought the land that Providence is on and made a fair deal. I made a fair deal as per their instructions. They need English goods, they can have them. That I don't. Canonicus and the Antinomy can have any of the English goods that I have. If they need my boat for transportation in one place up or down or out of the bay, they may have that. If they need my services as a translator from their language to the English, there's a dispute, I will mediate. I will advise one way or the other. And all this at no charge to them. And sometimes at a great travail to me. But I am that middle person in between themselves, the great Narragansett people, and the other English who they neither trust nor want to deal with. And when forced to, it's usually a demand from Boston on them to make a payment for this or make a payment for that. And I'm the one that's in the middle there trying to negotiate and trying to work out a deal in between the two. Trying to calm the feathers of Boston or the Narragansett. And that is part of that first land deal for Providence.
I knew I would learn new stuff.
That's what we endeavor to do.
When you were talking about servitude,
Aye.
you mentioned blacks, you mentioned whites. What about the native people?
They were not included in 1652 because they do make up the majority of the population of Rhode Island. Unless captured in war, they cannot be held in servitude either. But to give you an idea, at the beginning of what's called the King Philip's War, there were roughly 1,500 to 2,000 English living in Rhode Island. There's 15,000 to 20,000 Narragansett. The English only make up 10% of the population. That's why we keep so many of the native names for places, because, well, it's their names. And if you want to know, you go down to Misquamicut or Quanakatog. Okay? Or the English names for things are at the head of the bay and on the island. Most of the other places still maintain their native names because it's mostly their land. Take a look at the names for roads. Okay, we might slap a name on it, but it's an ancient road. Okay, the Pequot Path. We called it the Great Road to the Pequot. That has been their trail down the east side of the bay forever, for thousands, they say. What is the words now? From time immemorial, they have been here. Who's to argue with them? You can tell by the wear on the roads that these roads have been used by many feet for many, many, many generations. They're well packed down and hard. Both the north-south roads and the east-west ones. The one that goes from the tip of the Cape to Providence, or the one that goes from Boston, from Plymouth to Providence. These are all seriously well-traveled roads. And as I said, the great road that goes from Boston into Providence and on to New Amsterdam, that is just an amazing road. Some of the English highways back in England were as good. You don't see roads like that unless you go to the ancient Roman ones that are still in use. It's not that they're paved, but they're well packed down, hard, solid.
You know you're on a road.
Exactly. Except in the winter. Which is how I got lost leaving Salem.
Yeah.
I knew there were pathways and roads, but could not see them for the snow.
Good thing was Native Americans found you.
Without them, there would be no story of my life, I can tell you that honestly. They took me in, they cared for me all winter. They fed me. And then they gave me land in the east side of the bay there.
At that point in time, were you able to communicate with them in
Yes.
language?
Yeah.
Or was it
I learned
more-
their language when I was at Plymouth. Because I needed a job, because a minister should not be paid. A minister should minister to the people out of his heart after doing a week's work as they do. So, I'm a city boy. I don't know how to farm. I don't know how to hunt. And I don't know how to fish. What I do know how to do is trade. So I took a surplus of English goods, knives, kettles, hoes, axes, blankets, coats, and went out among the Wampanoag, the Pokanoket, and the Narragansett, and did trade with them. And what's the first thing, the easiest thing to do if you're going to trade with someone? Is learn how to speak to them. So I have a gift for languages, and I was able to learn their language, and am constantly learning more. I would sit down outside or inside their houses and sit around in a circle and what would you call this? What would you call that? Names were going back and forth, and I did, to the best of my ability, learn as much as I could about them. Or, do you speak more than one language? Do you?
I used to.
Well,
It's in
do you speak any more than one language?
not fluent.
Well, but you were familiar with. I'll give you an example. In English, we have a sheet of paper, yes? We're all familiar with that. And we also have a sheet on the bed. And there's a sheet of ice. And a sheet of glass. All of these are long, flat, smooth things used to cover something else, yes? In French, the very same thing is called une feuille de papier, a leaf of paper. A leaf. All of a sudden, there's all these other images in your head aside from the sheet on the bed, the sheet of glass, the sheet of ice, the sheet of paper. All of a sudden, all these other images look around you. They're changing color, they're living and breathing, they move with the wind, they fall in the autumn. There's a whole set of ideas different than in our sheet. And when you learn another language, they don't just substitute words one for another. They substitute entire pictures and ideas and thoughts, even with a single word. So when you learn that new language, you learn that they're thinking different than you. And you start to understand what they are thinking about. So in learning the native people's language, I began, cannot say fully, but I began to understand the way that they look at the world. And then I, being with them, learned about their hunting, their fishing, their farming, realizing that they're utilizing all of this land without putting fences up. The way the English are constantly putting fences up and enclosing. But they use all the land here, every year. And this is To the English, very strange. Every year they set fire to the woods. Gets rid of the leaves, turns it back into the ground. Gets rid of ticks and fleas and all the other bugs that might bother you. Gets rid of the thorn bushes. Opens things up. Small saplings, little seedlings are all destroyed. Opens up the woods so it's a perfect place for the hardwood trees that survived the fire. The oak, the hickory, the walnut, the chestnut trees. All growing to tremendous size. And then a space, and then another tree. It's more like the King's game parks back in England than it is a wilderness, because the first things to grow back are grasses and berry bushes. Grasses, berries, and nuts are the perfect food for the deer and the bear. So, by setting these fires, they have learned over generations, they are managing the entire landscape to produce a surplus of food. Not just the crops that they grow, but the nuts and berries they also harvest, but also the deer and the bear. And with the deer and the bear, you have skins and furs to keep you warm in the winter. All of these things are just by doing a small thing like setting a fire and letting it go. And moves quickly because you do it every year. Does not harm the hardwood trees, for they are fire resistant. It's a wonderful method. And you don't see woods like these with all little tiny, scrawny little trees that are doing nothing. Good day, sir.
Good day to you, my man.
And how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Kids today and
Outstanding.
having a good old time.
Outstanding.
I thought I noticed Captain Kelly was around.
It's not Captain Kelly, it's Roger Williams.
Oh, Roger Williams. I just got a show on.
Okay, will do.
He had spent many a year in England itself, so he knew how English think about things, as well as knowing how the native peoples here think about things. So he did use that as a leverage tool, he said, to scare the Indians to do what he wanted them to do. This did not go very well, and it's, at one point Osamequin did say that that Tisquantum had a death sentence on him, and it was shortly after that that he ended up dying of a sickness himself at the trading post out at the base of the cave. Mm-hmm. But Osamequin was a great man. What do you say about these people? I mean,
well, I know you reported that you spent 14 weeks.
14 weeks without English bed or bread. Now,
right.
Now, mind you, that's 14 weeks. It's a poetic way of saying without an English style home. Okay, I wasn't
Right.
wandering in the wilderness
No.
for 14 weeks. They did take me in. Osamequin, he was generous.
Yeah.
They did take me in, feed me, shelter me, take care of me, because my feet were frostbitten.
Sure.
It was so cold. And then in the springtime, they give me land up on what is now the 10-mile river.
Yeah.
He gets a letter from Governor Winslow at Plymouth saying, as much as we like you, Roger, we like Boston better. And
Right.
you're still within the bounds of the Plymouth colony. Now, that's them claiming that they own up to the Seekonk River. Just go across the river and we can all live as good neighbors. Well, that's when I went across the river and engaged with several of the Nahagansett. Now, I had known them before too, and we made a deal for me to live along the Great Salt Cove that was there, where the Mashasik and the Woonasquatucket come together.
So, was that considered Osamequin's land or Kananakas?
In the recent years, since the deaths, okay, it was definitely controlled by the Nahagansett.
Right.
Okay, there was no doubt about that. The Pokanoket, the group that they're calling Wampanoag, they had hard enough going out in hunting parties. There was so few of the people left. So the way they used to do everything and what area they controlled, I believe it would be like any English or continental thing where the lines of control go back and forth. And our ideas about boundaries from England and from the continent are not the way they think about boundaries here. Okay. Yes, there is an area that is controlled by Nahagansett. Yes, there's an area that's controlled by Wampanoag. Yes, there's an area that's controlled by Nipmuc. But they're very precise on their boundaries. But the boundaries are not as hard. It's not like you can't go across that line if you're one of them. Everybody's related around here.
No passports needed.
Well, there are instances where there is something like that is needed. If you're going into the area above New Amsterdam, you must have some sort of way of identifying yourself, and that you are a decent person to get past the keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee, the people that live up there. They are a different people. They act differently. Their culture is different than the people that live in New England. It's a very different influence, if you would. They have great towns across the entire span of their land. I mean, we're talking great areas with hundreds of weetus inside and longhouses, all surrounded by great palisades. In this area here, only in times of dire stress do they go to a palisaded fortress, if you would. For the most part, if you were to take and walk along the coast, you'd see a house and the fields, and then a space. And then another house and fields, and then some more space. And people would live along the coast in the warmer weather, and then move inland into the sheltered valleys to be more protected from the winds and the weather that comes along the coast.
What would their houses look like?
Well, the individual family houses are built of a framework of saplings and covered with mats and then bark on the outside. And there's a small fire in the center. There are platforms around the outside, on the inside, but around the perimeter, if you would, of their house. 15, 20 feet in diameter and 10, 15 feet tall. A small door on one side and a hole in the top with a flap to let the smoke out. That would be an individual house. That would be a house of one fire. In the winters, they would join families together into bigger, longer houses, long houses, of a house of 2 fires or 3 fires. And each fire is a center for each family.
Okay, now this is the Narragansett.
Aye, the Narragansett.
And I understand the English found those houses warmer than their own.
They are. In this place,
Yeah.
the native peoples know how to build their own houses. And they're also much more resistant to the great storms that might come from the northeast. When the great wind comes out of the northeast, our square houses with square roofs and chimneys have been toppled over by this weather. You see the roof knocked in or the chimney knocked off because of the great winds that come out of the northeast.
I was just reading about a hurricane in 1628.
Before I got here, but there was
Yeah.
great storms,
Yeah.
these great storms. The Spanish call them, I think, the hurricanes,
Yeah.
because they do plague them more down in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
They have lost many a gold ship,
Oh, yeah.
many a fleet of gold ships.
Right.
Now, if I was an ambitious young man, that might be something to go after, but I
Well-
have my work to do here.
I was wondering, you're now a mature man. As you look back on your life and all your troubles with Plymouth and Mass Bay, do you think you could have done anything differently? Or were these people just so dogmatic that it was almost impossible?
I did not cut off communications with any of them. I think that the motivation of some of the English coming over here was along the same lines as myself. But even in Rhode Island, there are English that have come over here with a sense of greed, with a sense of thievery and theft. You take a look at William Harris, William Arnold down to Patuxet, that literally are stealing land from the native peoples. And oh, it's on the agreement. No, it's not. I signed that agreement, that land evidence. And they put an extra whole paragraph that gives them tens of thousands of acres of native land that was not granted to them. They're thieves, outright thieves. So not all English are coming over here with the same motivation. Some of them you can talk to, some of them you can argue with. We have had a great debate with the Quakers down to Newport. Some there's no speaking to. So as much variety as you can imagine in any modern day person, we have with all of these.
Actually parallels then with today?
There's an old joke from Master Shakespeare, first thing kill all the lawyers.
I didn't hear.
First thing kill all the lawyers.
Ah, yes.
Master Shakespeare.
There's some thoughts to that.
Well, now you have to understand that my early career was with lawyers. Okay, Sir Edward Coke, Chief Justice of England, okay, standing up to King James himself, saying that the people of England, going back to the Magna Carta, have rights that cannot be taken away arbitrarily by a king. You know what King James did when he's spoken to like that by Sir Edward? This is what I'm told, that the king is at court, he's sitting in his throne, and Sir Edward speaks up. Well, the king actually stood up at court and stomped his foot. Now, we might think that that's just bad behavior, but at court there are rules. For the king to stand
Everybody
and
else
stomp
dances,
his
you
foot
know.
to display his anger is just shy of declaring war. This is of great import. But this is my mentor, is showing me to stand up to power and to talk truth, no matter where it is.
Everybody's truth sometimes is different.
Well, that's why my book, The Bloody Tenant, I have it as a dialogue between truth and peace. Which would you rather have? Truth or peace?
That's a hard question.
It's a very hard question. It's a very hard question. For many people, truth is too hard. Many people will compromise and compromise and compromise to keep the peace. But when you're compromising about religion, that's where the failure is. Because religion cannot be compromised. God's word cannot be compromised. And when you're making those political compromises to keep peace, your religion fails. That's where the hard truth, which is difficult and hard to hear and may hurt, is what's necessary.
And they had so many different ideas of what the truth was.
Well, as I mentioned before, for Boston, those people, their truth was God was blessing them with their city on the hill, to be a beacon to the rest of the world on how to fix England and how to live. They were only making the same mistakes, though, as the old world had, that cost hundreds of thousands of lives in wars over the years in between religious groups. My vision was to create a place where no one is punished for their religion. Catholic, Jew, Turk, or infidel, does not matter. As long as you're a good citizen. You come here, you work hard, you don't disrupt your neighbors. That's a good citizen of this place. Too many people think because someone worships on Saturday or worships on Friday that they should be punished because they're wrong. Well, who's to judge that? You mentioned many truths. I'm not saying that they're right and someone else is wrong. What I'm saying is I am not the judge of their faith. You have liberty of conscience. Your conscience determines what you're doing. Whether it's from your great book, the Quran, whether it's from the Hebrew scriptures, or whether it's from the Bible. If you are honestly following that in your heart, I'm not your judge. That's why I said with the 10 Commandments, the first 4 are in between you and your Creator. If you mess them up, you're the one that has to pay.
Right.
The last 6 are what a civil government is for. Don't steal, don't murder, don't take your neighbor's things. And if everyone learned that simple way of looking at things, what a more joyous place it would be. But instead, no, they want bigger bowls of oatmeal and more riches for themselves. And they start gathering and grabbing and taking. And that's my heartbreak with all of this, that my ideas will get lost and people will forget what we worked so hard for here.
going back to growing up in London, you were in Smithfield, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you went to school there.
Charterhouse.
Charterhouse, right? But what was your thinking at that time about leaving for America in '31? And did you know Captain John Smith, who had come back over there?
Yeah.
You went to the same church.
We went to the St. Sepulchre's, the same church.
Yeah.
He's buried there at St. Sepulchre's. He would come to all the taverns, and my mother ran one right across the street from our house. And he would come there and talk of his things. Also, there's the great Smithfield, the great St. Bart's Fair up in Smithfield, which is goods from all over, all different realms across the world are brought there and put on display. Theaters act out plays. People, strange animals from different parts of the world are put on display there. It's a true fair. There are acrobats and jugglers and all different kinds of activities. And that's where I saw my first native people, the St. Bart's Fair, just 100 yards away from my house. It's also where they held the executions for criminals and heretics and recusants and such.
So
when I was very little, it's where the traitors that has tried to blow up Parliament were all executed in Smithfield.
So as a child, you were smelling burning human flesh.
Aye, and hearing it.
Yeah.
It added to the regular smells of London, if I might, because there are butcher shops. Next, not far away was Fleet Street, which was also called Fleet Sewer. It was an open river, which was an open sewer, if you would.
There's all the smoke.
The smoke, there's the animals. There are, as I said, the butcher shops and the offal, which is thrown out into the streets. What cannot be used is thrown into the gutter to be washed away down into the river. The smells of the city are unique. Let's put it that way.
So that was one reason to leave and go to America. But
I didn't leave from London. I left. No.
Right.
I was up in Essex when I left. I went to Cambridge after Charterhouse. I went up to Cambridge. Went to school there at Pembroke, and that's far more less of a city than London is. And it's further inland. The thing about London that's fascinating is there's people from all over the world in that one city. Dozens and dozens of languages are heard on the street every day. Food from all over the world is available in any of these markets. The sounds, the smells, all of these things. And you go up to Cambridge, and you've got an inland city. It still has a trade access to the ocean by the rivers, but it's a very different feel to it. Not nearly so cosmopolitan, if you would. But because it's so far from the great crowds, and it's just the colleges and some churches there and some markets, if you will, too, it's a much lighter feel to it. Fewer people, easier to get along and move along. And then I went to Essex to Oates Manor there, run by the Mashams. And that's out in the countryside. It's a manor house in the countryside. And that's like, it's just beautiful.
When did you first think of coming to America?
It's at
the
Oates,
Masham's
Oates
house.
run by the Mashams there. Archbishop Laud was cracking down on all what he called recusants all across the country. And it was getting harder and harder to preach what you believed. And it's one of the reasons a large number of people left to go to the Massachusetts Bay. You know, when the English came to Plymouth, there was one ship.
Right.
When the English came to Boston, there was 7 ships. 1,000 people. So it's a great migration, if you would.
And you left just a year after that.
Not even a year.
Yeah.
It was months after the first wave. I did come into a Boston that was barely established. And they didn't want me as their minister.
So you went to Plymouth.
Well, I went to Salem first because I could not stand what was going on in Boston.
And then you went to Plymouth.
And then I went
back up to Salem.
Back up to Salem.
Had a hard time finding a good place to stay, huh?
The places were all good.
Yeah.
It's that my words got me in trouble. Plymouth, I did say that you could not just take the land because the king says so.
Right.
You must make a deal with the people who own the land, the rightful owners of the native people round about us. And if you wish to live here, you talk to them and make some sort of a deal. Well, the English said the land was empty, had been cleared for them by God, which a disease comes through and kills everyone. From their interpretation of their actions,
Yep.
the land was cleared for them. Boston, the same thing. The people had been cleared off the land, but 10 years, 11 years before.
And William Blackstone came along.
Blackstone was there first and forced out by the people.
But-
Yes.
But he left that wonderful guy.
Well, he's just across the river here. No?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
He left.
That's why
a
we
cou-
call it Mr. Blackstone's River.
He left a couple of years before you
He
came.
did. He
Yeah.
did, and he came down to the edge of everything.
Yeah.
No.
What? Many people have said to me, "How did he get here with his 400 books on the
Not
back?"
400.
on
He,
the-
he had no 400 books. No. 100 and some.
186.
But
Something
still,
along those lines.
One-
Still a good number.
yeah.
He had a bull.
And he alone carried those.
Sure.
Yeah.
A bull is a mighty creature that can
Sure.
carry great amounts.
Yeah.
And they
And-
were smaller, weren't they?
Hmm?
The books were smaller.
There were a variety of different books that he had, some large, some small. But he did have a great library.
Yeah.
But it's easy enough for the bull to be able to move things like that.
So he didn't have help coming down. No.
He's not the kind of person that would take help.
Okay.
Someone tried to build a fence across his land over here a few years ago, and he goes out and chases the man off his land with an axe, and then pulls up the fence posts with his bare hands.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking a man, in my opinion, we're talking of a man who has a temper and knows it,
Mm.
and probably why he left Boston. He did not wish to lose his temper with his countrymen. Comes down here. He was not a hermit here,
No.
by any means.
You spent some time with him.
I did. He's no hermit, though. He
Yeah.
has his rose gardens. He has his apple orchards. He is an English country gentleman, is the way he sees it. He has his country estate, which he calls Study Hall. Okay? And the fish in the river, the crossing there, okay, and the major highways that come together for transportation, he's at a crossroads where everyone has to go by there if you're going up north. So, no hermit. A great library. A man with a temper that knows it, and knows how to actually, well, I'll tell you what he did. If he went back when he went back to Boston, you know what he would do first? Put his vestments on, the Church of England vestments, and go parading into Boston, fully set up as a minister of the Church of England. After all they'd done to get away from it, he goes right into the midst of them and saying, "What are you going to do?" He had originally come over here to bring the Church of England to the people of Plymouth. He was set up just north of them.
Yeah.
Okay. When that settlement did not work, he went further into the Massachusetts Bay, and he set up where he did a Shawmut there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they called it then.
Shawmut. Yeah.
Shawmut.
Right.
And then when the
same,
English
same as around Warwick.
what's that? It's a place name. It's a native
Yeah,
place name.
right.
It's a peninsula in salt water.
Right.
And when the other English did come to that place, they were across the river, and their water was no good.
Yeah.
It was all brackish. So they did ask to come over. You know what's telling about this?
That was from
Winthrop
today's
has a diary.
Charlestown.
Winthrop
Yeah.
has a diary. He writes
Yeah.
everything down. Okay. The first person that signed the loyalty oath for their new town was William Blackstone.
Right.
Okay. Not once does Winthrop mention this man's name. Not once. The person that invited them to come onto this land.
Yeah.
The person that is the first person to sign the oath. Not once is he mentioned.
Saved their lives.
Aye. Not once is he mentioned. And then, within a short time, I think they were grating on his nerves, trying to pressure him to renounce the Church of England. And instead of losing his temper, he decides to leave. He uproots his apple trees. He uproots his roses. He takes his books. He's got a lot of stuff, and comes down here and starts afresh.
Well,
apple trees, and roses.
That's why I can't imagine one man and a bull getting all that down there.
Well,
but in any case,
he may have had some sort of a cart as well.
well, it's those tough on those paths. Yeah,
Well, the roads are well made.
yeah.
I mean,
could you
you've
do a two-wheeled cart on the road?
Aye.
Yeah.
oh, they were not just pathways in the woods.
Okay.
These are highways,
Yeah.
as good as any English highway, almost as good as the Roman roads.
Wow.
Would he have walked most of the way and let the
He could have ridden the bull. He could have ridden the bull. He was used to that.
I was thinking more in terms of loading the bull with all
Well, if-
this kind of stuff.
I do not know. He did not ever mention this, but he could have had a cart, and the bull's pulling the cart, and all the things that he needs are in the cart. You could ride the bull, or you could ride on the cart yourself. He could walk part of the way, because we are not opposed to walking anywhere.
Most of the time there wasn't a lot of choice.
Aye, there is that. The other way is go by water,
There,
which he did not do.
there are members of the Narragansett tribe today who claim that Blackstone had enslaved people.
He did, after the Pequot War.
Yeah.
There were several of the Pequot, but enslaved is not quite the right word. They were servants.
Indentured.
They were in servitude for him, to him, for a period of time,
Right.
as they were for myself.
Yeah.
What do you do with these people?
Well, that's how you get anything done.
Well, it's not just labor. It is also, after a war,
Hmm.
what do you do with the people that you have just defeated, so that the war does not start again? Good day, sir. And how are you on this fine day?
Very good for it.
Whoa! Sycamore.
Yes.
Outstanding. I was just to Mr. Blackstone's, that's what we were talking about.
Oh, okay.
Or the Reverend Blackstone. Must not dishonor him. He is a good man.
Yeah. Must have been good. They named the river after him.
Well, it was the Pawtucket River. It was the Pequot River. It was the Nipmuc River. It goes by all different names. I just happen to call it Mr. Blackstone's River
Yeah.
because he has his house alongside of it.
Yes.
And that seems to have stuck after many years.
Changed a little in spelling.
Well, you have to understand, he spelled his name on purpose that way. It's not an X. It's the Greek chi. It's the Greek letter chi for Christ.
Okay.
In the middle of it, Christ is in the middle of his name.
Oh.
He knew how to spell. He has many degrees. He's been well educated. He knows how to spell his own name.
Good.
Blackstone. He put the X in there the way some people do to celebrate Christmas. It's a shorthand form, putting Christ into it.
What did they write on the statue in Boston, in the Commons? There's a William Blackstone.
Well, he did live up in those commons were his grazing fields.
Yes, yeah.
He had better land than the rest of the English that came.
Oh, I know.
And we were just talking of that.
They harassed him till he left.
Well, and I was just saying this to them. My belief of him is that he is a good man that has a temper.
Yeah.
For when someone tried to build a fence across his land, he chased the person off his land with an axe, and then went and proceeded to pull the fence posts out of the ground with his bare hands. I believe that when he invited Winthrop and those to come live on his side of the river, okay, he's the first to sign the document, William Blackstone, that he was going to be a good citizen there. And Mr. Winthrop, a good friend of mine, who kept a diary of everything, not once mentions the Reverend Blackstone. He mentions everything else, but not once does he mention Blackstone. So I have this feeling that the tension between them was over the Church of England. Blackstone was a minister of the Church of England, and they were probably pressuring him to renounce the church, since that's why they left England. And instead of losing his temper, he decides to remove himself from the boiling pot, if you would,
Yes.
and comes down air. And he sets up not a hermit's place, but a place where rivers and roads come together, and sets up apple orchard, rose gardens, library. It's an English country gentleman.
He also continues.
It's too bad they lost his bones. It's a shame.
Well, Once we're done with them, what good are they anyway? I'd rather keep them when I'm alive, I'll tell you that straight. If someone loses mine afterwards, I'm not that upset.
He also continued preaching, didn't he?
Constantly.
We're talking the Catholic Oak.
The Catholic Oak there, they'd gather underneath there, they would meet in houses.
Shit.
Okay, but he would constantly preach, aye.
He would go down to
Wickford.
what's now called,
Yep.
his castle.
Good.
Smith's place down there, near my trading post down to Cocomscussick. And he would go to Wickford. Church of England services everywhere. First one to do that. After all we went through to get away from the Church of England, he's right in the middle of it, making sure that we know that it's still around. Excellent.
I think it was mentioned when the Queen died, the Church of England, right?
Aye. Aye. And now we have another Charles.
Yeah.
I'm used to Charles.
Number 3.
I'm used to Charles. The first one lost his head, and the second one, well, he gave us our charter. Used to that.
You have to be champion for him for that.
Have to give it that, because that gives us more liberty than any place in the old world or the new. We elect our own governor.
We used it for a long time.
Aye. Hopefully. We
Yeah.
use it for a great long time.
Yeah.
Gives us authority over our own lives. Something that most other charters did not do.
Which is why we kept it as long after our freedom.
All right then. Do we have anything else?
This is a somewhat unrelated question.
Right then.
You were talking about the farming and the Three Sisters.
Aye.
Was that something the natives called it, the Three Sisters?
In their language, yes.
Okay. But yet, how did it spread? A number of years ago, I was out at Taos Pueblo, and they were mentioning the Three Sisters. Now, the mention of the farming method spread makes sense, but the name is surprising. I mean, you didn't write letters to your cousins in Taos.
I will show you. Have a leaf.
Ah,
You have a leaf now, yes?
yes.
If you wish, you may give someone else that leaf and tell them it's a leaf.
Okay.
It's handing off.
Okay.
It's
all
talking
right.
to each other.
So that answers that question. Thank you.
The Three Sisters, none of those plants are native to this area. They all come from, as the natives say, from Katantowit's house in the southwest. And they have traveled, they say, slowly until they came here. They were taught how to do it. Well, the corn came here in a crow's ear. Okay?
Ah.
The crow brought the corn here,
Okay.
according to their legend. And has done a great job of teaching them how to grow things. So I know it works. I've seen their fields. When the English fields are drying up and blowing away in dust, the native fields are growing strong. These plants are sturdy, and as I said, they provide tremendous amount of nutrition. Corn, beans, and squash, the great succotash.
But they only had corn for about 1,000 years, roughly, that we know of here.
I really can't speak to that,
I
as
know,
Roger.
right?
But
But the people who study those things tell us that. So
1,000, 1,500 years. I
Yeah.
mean, you got to understand what may be here and not preserved.
right,
Okay,
but
but
that,
at least 1,000 years,
yeah.
maybe
So it was hunting, gathering, moving around more.
a little bit more. I mean, you're anchored by the ocean resources, particularly
Right.
around here, because you don't want to move away from them, because they are constant even if any of the plants
Oh, yeah.
fail.
Right.
You've still got oysters, you still got the salmon runs. Okay, but this area around here, by manipulating the environment only a little, produces a great surplus of food, as I mentioned. You don't have to go far to find deer, or bear,
Right.
or other animals to eat, or the nuts and the berries that the deer and the bear eat, if you set fire to the woods every year. So you don't have to be wandering around the way they do further north, where they don't have such an abundance of resources all around them.
It's just once you grow corn, though, you do have to stay there.
You stay there for the season.
Yeah.
Right? And I have heard tell that the native people can grow the same crop in the same field for 15 to 20 years. Whereas the English, if we tried that, we'd have nothing.
1 or 2 seasons.
We could go 5.
Yeah.
But not much more than that. We have to find new land.
Right.
You've got, in the spring, I believe, you've got the alewives
Yeah.
coming upstream. And you capture them in baskets, dry them out, and then you put them in the ground and mound the dirt up above them. And there's your fertilizer. There's already some nutrients in the soil, and the fish create the rest of it.
And I'm always interested that this English tell the tale of Squantum teaching the English, but if you were native, it's the women who would do the farming. So I wonder about
Squantum
the
may have
story.
informed the English of it.
Yeah.
I mean, he would be aware of it.
Right.
And in all honesty, there weren't very many other native peoples round about Plymouth at that time because of the plague.
Right.
Okay, so Squanto would be this intermediary, and he would have helped them out that way.
Yeah.
But yes, the crops are the women's work.
Right.
The hunting is the men's work.
So once you had crops like corn and squash and beans,
Aye.
then you had a clear division of labor then. The women,
Well, with gathering and things like hunting,
Yeah.
if you're a hunter-gatherer, the gathering is done by the women, and the hunting
right.
is done by the men.
Yeah.
So the
who
division
would
is,
do the clams and the seafood?
that's open to anyone.
Okay.
But again, women can go down there at other times. The men will be off hunting somewhere.
Right,
Fishing, going fishing in the ocean with their great canoes.
right.
Um,
And
swordfish.
and occasional whale.
Swordfish, whale,
Dolphins.
bluefish.
Yep.
When the bluefish are running up the bay, it does not take much to capture them. And the salmon, of course, when they're coming up the rivers.
Right.
But there's so much seafood. Seals.
Yeah.
There's seals all around here. All different kinds of fish. Codfish.
Yeah.
Don't get me into that.
Who would do the preserving?
Smoke or salt?
Who would do it?
Who would do it?
Yeah, men or women?
For the native people, the food is the again you get that division. The animals that are captured are smoked by the people that capture it. So the deer and the bear and things like that would be preserved by the men.
Okay.
Okay, the skins are prepared by the women to make the clothing, which is a different sort of nurturing, if you would. As far as the English, I mean, we didn't have such a great division, if you would, when it came to getting the food prepared for the winter. And so everybody would be working on smoking the food to preserve it for the winter.
Time's coming to the end. You got to get it all smoked.
The crops that are in the field have to be dried and preserved. The animals that are around have to be dried and smoked and preserved and such. Salt is a precious commodity, so smoking is the easiest way to do it. Dries them out, preserves them. And I'll tell you, smoked salmon is not a bad dish. And of course ham, and bacon, and the butter, and the cheeses. The diet here is not bad. I think many an English nobleman would be envious of our diet here. The ducks, the geese, the swans, all of this. The ducks so thick, they blot out the sun for a while when they're flying over.
Pigeons do the same.
Pigeons the same. Much smaller food, but
Yeah.
I'd rather have the duck than the pigeon, in all honesty. And the geese even more than the duck. And there's turkeys. There's the egrets. There's great quantities of food around here, and the deer are in huge abundance. And they're much bigger than the English deer. The English deer are twice the size of your dog.
Yep.
Okay. These deer are massive, huge. And some of them, the ones that the native people called the moose, are bigger than anything we've seen before. Except maybe the elephant that comes from Africa. These moose, the antlers are this far apart. You try to tell an Englishman in England about something like a moose and they laugh at you. It's the place where the moose comes to drink.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Oh, Gracie sees the swallow.
Ah. On alert. She's beautiful.